I mean, it's in those days that we, sometimes, motherhood, from what I've watched, both of my own mom and as I watched Melinda mother, and I've had this conversation with my mom, it's like, when does mothering stop? And she says, when I'm gone. And it's like, it doesn't stop, and how grateful we are for that. And for those of you, particularly that maybe motherhood may be far or maybe never came to you, I just think that part of that video I really appreciated was the idea of how we all speak in each other's lives and how important that is. And so this morning, we just want to honor that and want to give tribute to that because we don't do life by ourselves, do we? So we're in this series called Stir It Up, and I started last week with this analogy of we looked at Genesis 2:7, where we're all created out of dirt. It's like we're all dirt bags. I sort of told everybody, which isn't quite true, but necessarily when you think about it, and how soil is the only thing that's ready for a seed. And part of the journey we're on is really trying to, I dug out the box that you didn't know was there to remind you that there's a gift that's inside of you, and part of the responsibility for the church is to help you figure that out. But there's sometimes that things come against us that we buy what I call head trash. That's probably too generic of a term, but there's just words that we hear about who we are that sometimes we don't measure up. And I don't know if any of you watch any of the cable TV shows, but I want to show just a short story here about someone who walked through that. She and her husband, Joanna Gaines, I don't know if that name rings a bell, she has the Fix It Upper, and how they've moved from obscurity to now they are actually a TV show that everybody likes to sort of tune into. But hear Joanna's story this morning.
I remember as a little girl, my mom was Korean and my father was Caucasian, and I never knew there was anything different about myself until I started going to school. And I'll never forget an experience I had in the school lunchroom. I remember standing there and seeing this sea of people, but like all eyes were on me. And I was thinking, who's going to be my friend? Who am I going to sit with? I started walking through that lunchroom, and then I remember darting straight out, and I found a bathroom, locked myself in a stall. But in those moments is when I really believe that that's where the lie was sown, that who I wasn't good enough. As we all do, I grew up and I grew out of the insecurities, had great friends, great childhood, and I remember in those times I heard him specifically say, Joanna, I have a calling for you. You're going to have a platform one day. And I remember thinking, what does that even mean? And I remember hearing God say, Joanna, there's going to come a time where I'm going to say for you to go, and I'm going to need you to step out and go. After graduating college, a couple years later, I ended up meeting this handsome, rugged cowboy who was hilarious, Chip Gaines. And we got married, and he knew that I had this whole thing of businesses that I wanted to start, but he also knew I was never going to just take the risk and start them. I just dreamed about them. And he really encouraged me to step out and make one of those dreams happen. And we opened Magnolia Market together, and I loved it. But at that time I was also pregnant with my second child, and I really felt like God was saying, hey, I want you home. I want you raising these babies at home at this age. And I remember the last day, we're closing the shop down, and I'm crying because, again, I feel like it's the end of a dream. And I hear God say very clearly, he said, Joanna, if you trust me with your dreams, I'm going to take Magnolia further than you could have ever dreamed. So just trust me. And I remember hearing that and feeling completely peaceful about it. And I walked away. Well, a couple years ago, we get this call from a production company, and they ask us to film a quick video of our family and what we do as a business, and that turned into the show that we have now. Chip and I laugh. We look back and we just go, how did this all happen? And I remember last year in January, Chip and I took a trip to Arizona, and we were driving around and we found this really beautiful garden, and Chip said, I'm going to drop you off here. I'm going to give you about an hour, and I want you to kind of reflect on the year before, and then just let God speak to you about what this next year is going to look like. And he dropped me off, and I'm sitting under this tree, and I felt like God said, Joe, it's time. And I was like, time for what? And he said, it's time to reopen your store. store. And I said, I don't think I can do that. And just cool and calm, no, it's time. May of last year, we reopened the shop in Bosque, a little shop on Bosque. And now I look back and I go, God, your promise that you spoke years ago, I'm now seeing. I trusted you with my dream, and you've taken it far beyond what I could have ever dreamed or imagined. You know, I can look back now on the pattern of my life and really believe God has a purpose for me, but he also has a purpose for you. And on the other side of that is the enemy, where he knows where to hit. He knows to hit below the belt. He's going to have that fear be, if you fail, what if you fail in front of all these people? What if you fail and don't find someone in the lunchroom? What if your business fails? Whether it's you're staying home with your children and you're raising beautiful babies, or you're the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, let God speak into your life. Let his Father heart come and say, this is what I have for you. And I think that's the key, not believing the lies, fixing our eyes on Jesus and walking in the truth.
That actually could be the message this morning, because of just that simple fact is that we buy the lies, and her counsel to us is don't buy the lies. And even this morning, trying to find a hymn to begin with this morning for Mother's Day, there aren't any real Mother's Day hymns, so gentlemen, if you feel inclined, you might be able to corner or mark it if you have that talent, because it's just like, how do we honor? So the best I could do, which I thought was great, was a Christmas hymn. I don't know if you noticed that, it's like we're singing Christmas, but this idea of the role that Mary got to play to usher in this young teenager, the king of the universe, literally, and how that day since has been such an amazing time for all of us. But the analogy I want to use this morning, and it's this idea of running the race. One of my favorite scriptures is this one here from Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. The writer says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and lets us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. I mean, there's this element in her story, in Joanna's story, of the fact that she set this thing aside. And even if we think about our own story and our own journey, there are things, even this morning in Adult Ed, we were talking about the journey that some of us have been on over the number of years, and how there are things that come along and actually come against us to steal that joy. That there are conversations and relationships and circumstances that we find ourselves in that hijacks what God wants to do. And I think that's the constant battle since literally in the garden that we've been trying to lean into. That literally, even as we talked a little bit about Adam and Eve, how in the garden, when the fall took place there in Genesis, that Eve is sort of the one that supposedly ate the fruit. But the thing I'd like to point out to men is that it was Adam, the scripture says, who stood by her side, and the Hebrew actually says silently, and watched her do it. The idea that Adam could have intervened, and like most men, we get fearful. And I think most of us in Christianity get fearful of leaning into the story that God invites us into. And so this morning I want to unpack that a little bit as we're thinking through, how do I live out of my giftedness? How do I live out of what God desires for me? But let me pray first, and then we'll move into the message. Father, we are grateful for women, especially this morning, as we celebrate this amazing day called Mother's Day. And we're mindful of the women who have spoken into us. It may be a biological connection, it may be a teacher, and maybe those words sometimes were cross. They were harsh words, but we know that they were words that were spoken out of love to shape us into the men and women you desire us to be. And so this morning, as we look into your word, to just the idea of stirring it up, what does it mean for us individually? Each of us this morning, what message do you have for us? And then what does it mean for us corporately as the Linden Road? But even then, what does it mean for us as the kingdom? As we leave here this morning, as we go and celebrate the women in our lives, the impact that they've made. Just thank you, Jesus, that we know that you are the truth, you are the way, you are the life, and that you have a desire for us to be in a relationship. And so though the lies come at us this morning, I just pray your Holy Spirit would clarify what you want us to hear. We thank you for loving us. We thank you for the provision that you've given us this morning on this amazing day, and we just pray that you would guide us through this conversation. And all God's people said, Amen. And I think it's kind of cool that on this day, and it was kind of fun as I was walking the halls before the service, that there was a couple surprises. So well done, family, on surprising folks. So that's always a good thing to do, to go, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. And that's sort of the joy. But let me talk about another surprise. Suppose you were sitting on your couch at home, and suppose there's a knock at the door, and you're actually maybe noshing on a Twinkie or some Doritos, or sipping whatever, a Gatorade or maybe a soda, and these folks show up at your door and they ask if they can come in. You allow them to come in, and they say, "Hey, we're actually here from the United States Olympic Committee, and we've decided that you're going to be our Olympic person for the running of the race." And it's like, oh, wait a minute, you don't understand. I have no qualifications, no capacity. There's 275 other million people out there, and why are you knocking on my door? The truth is, the farthest you've probably run in years is from the couch to the refrigerator, right? Or to the door, maybe to answer as you just did. And so maybe even like my riding a bike, it's like you start out on this journey and you realize this is really, really hard stuff. This is going to take more out of me than I don't know that I have. And so you're like, okay, I don't even jog. That you actually just even sort of walk to the store or walk to school. But after the shock passes and you're gripped by the realization of what's going to happen, that you are going to be this Olympian, you picture yourself, actually you start daydreaming about the role you get to play and how you can actually see yourself sitting there in, where are we at this year? Brazil? Is that what some of the games are? Brazil? There with all the other elite athletes, and you allow yourself to imagine walking in with the U.S. flag, and then you even imagine yourself standing on the podium after the race and hearing the national anthem play, seeing the flag raised and bending low to receive the gold medal. And then you sort of feel this rush of emotion, and you say to yourself, this is the race I was created to run. This is my destiny. This is why I was born. This race became the great passion of your life. And see, it dominates your mind. It actually occupies every waking moment. It's what you live for. And so if you have your worship notes, I just want to walk us through just an understanding this morning that there's, first of all, that all of our lives are like a race. And that as a believer in Jesus, you run a race too, every day. It's really the race of a lifetime. It should dominate your mind. It should occupy your waking moments. It becomes the central focus of your existence, and it's what you live for. Again, the writer of Hebrews here talks about this cloud of witnesses that is watching us, the encouragement. This is kind of crazy, but for me, when I ride my bike north of Ashland, and I ride in a group ride usually on Wednesday or Thursday nights, I always wing through, if you would follow me on Strava, you'd see that I wing through the Nanking Cemetery. And I always do that because that's where my paternal grandparents are buried. And I know it's kind of weird, but I ride by just with this idea, knowing that that's not their place, but out of honor to them. And I'll actually sometimes work my route through that. And what's been amazing is how I've been able to invite people who ride with me. It's like, why are you turning right? And it's like, well, I'm going to go say hi to my grandma and grandpa. And they follow me. And then it creates this great opportunity to talk about the character of my grandmother Ruth, who taught my bride Melinda how to can and how to make mincemeat. And so that's one of the reasons why I hashtag culinary artist her on Instagram all the time, because she has this amazing ability. But it's because of people like my grandmother Ruth who poured into her. And when you think about that story, for me, I'm sure in your own life, there are people, maybe some living, but maybe some that have actually moved on to glory, that have been able to pour into you, to offer you that idea. But the things I want us to see this morning is that, real quickly, there's this idea that the race has some elements to it, that it's uniquely yours, that it takes training, that it's full of obstacles, and that it requires endurance. I mean, in this race, as I mentioned earlier, like the Olympic race, you've been chosen. Last week, we sort of talked about this idea that each of us have a gift that God plants within inside of us. And sometimes it's a journey of a lifetime, like the story of Joseph, that although in hindsight we can see that one of the reasons that Joseph got himself in trouble because he was sort of an arrogant little boy, yet that arrogance gave him confidence so that when he was in his later years in life, he was actually able to lead the nation of Egypt out of the most desperate of times, and how God used that, and how sometimes it takes that journey. But see, I want us to see, though, that it's not the Olympic Committee that selected you, it's God Almighty has selected you. That He's the one that has been knocking on your door of your life since the day you were born. And for some of you, that may have been just a few years ago, like the kids downstairs, and for others of you, it's been an entire lifetime. And so also remember that this journey, it takes training. And so part of this series is trying to lay out sort of some framework that we're going to begin sort of walking ourselves through with this shape class that's coming up here in a couple of weeks. This idea that the race is unique to you, and sometimes I point this out, pastors struggle with this all the time, and even those of us who do ministry in the local church. And sometimes it's easier for us to do the ministry ourselves and invite someone else in to do it. And as I've mentored young men and women who want to be youth pastors, I have to remind them that if you do the ministry, then in some regards you're actually cheating someone else out of doing that same ministry that maybe actually, and probably is, more gifted than you are. A couple things that are sort of implied by this list here about what the race is that there aren't any timeouts. Like a marathon run, this race has no timeouts, there's no breaks, there's no intermissions, there's no half times. Paul basically, and we're going to look at a couple scriptures here, basically says you got to run it. You got to run it. And I realize that sometimes we weary from that. We weary from that because, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, the idea, the journey that some of us have been on, I mean, being in life in a local church is messy. It can be complicated because we get so passionate, even as we were talking about this morning in the book of James about the human tongue and how the human tongue says, we say sometimes words that we really don't mean, but people interpret them, and what that does is it takes us out. It takes out the relationship. I mean, if you just think about it for a moment, all of us, I mean, the one thing we all have in common is we all have a mom. She may be here, she may not be. But in those moments growing up, there are those moments when, in sort of a generic way, she could have taken us out, because of our attitude, right? I mean, there are those moments where she's like, you know what? And we generically say today, sort of, I brought you into this world, I can take you out. That's messy, and that's real. And sometimes I think within the walls of the church, we want to say, well, that's not here. It's like, no. If it's any place, it's here. Because we are trying to figure this stuff out together. And one of the books I quote often, just the title of it, is that John Ortberg's great work called People Are Normal Till You Get to Know Them. Because once we step into a relationship with people, it gets messy. And finally, I want us to see that in that messiness is that there's obstacles that we have to navigate around. There's financial obstacles. How are we going to fund it? There are the idea of the educational part. How are we going to do it? Are we going to find time in the calendar for us to make this thing happen? And that's really the responsibility that we each have to lean into, because like I said, this race of life doesn't end. We are constantly in it. And it's interesting here that the Apostle Paul says this. Don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. I don't know that within Christianity I want to say that there's a prize that we're competing against each other. It isn't like Linden Road versus Berean, and we're going to all work at this. Although if we were doing a 5K or we're doing Battle of the Bands or Battle of Dodgeball, maybe that's what we want to do. But in this kingdom understanding, it's like we want to win. We want to be successful. We want, at the end of the day, like the video I showed last week, we want to know that when we're standing before God and our life is over, that we've leaned into every opportunity that He creates for us. And that it's not about beating down the other runners, it's about actually all of us going together. And really, it's about this idea of you becoming a spiritual champion. A spiritual champion is one who's sold out to Jesus, who's straining more to become more like Him than everything else that they could possibly do. And that the finish line of faith is a life that is more Christ-like today than it was yesterday. The goal is not perfection. The goal is just simply progress. I just want to be better today. I want to love God and I want to love others better than I did yesterday. But then the final point is this idea in my list there was it's endurance. You just got to do it. You just got to stay with it. You got to stay with it, much like practicing an instrument, to get ready for a competition, or practicing drama, to be able to be that person that's on the stage, to live out that talent. Or no different than the practice that our choir goes through every week to share with you amazing hearts and voices. So we have to sort of have persistence. There has to be perseverance. There has to be patience. There has to be this idea of resolve. I'm going to do it. And if we want to win, victory sort of necessitates that we run with those ideas, about being unswerving and persistent and steadfast until we get to that line. Now, the principle for this race that I want us to see this morning is simply this. Is this. It's about changing our lives spiritually, not a matter of trying harder, but of training wisely. We talked last week in Adult Ed about this idea of justification by faith. And those of you that were here when the students we shared the gospel in 6 words, this great guy, Propaganda, Spoken Word Dude, talks about how our good enough isn't good enough. That there's this idea that it's not about somehow our works righteousness sort of takes us to a new place with Jesus. And it's really out of our love for Jesus that we love others and that we do good works. Not because it's going to get us a crown in heaven or a jewel in our crown in heaven, but more importantly because it's really about what should be driving us. So you're back to your home now, and the U.S. You're thinking about your U.S. Committee's invitation, and it dawns on you you've never run a marathon. More to the point, you can't run a marathon even if you try really, really hard. And if you're serious about seizing the gold and standing on the winner's platform, you're going to have to enter a lifetime of training. You must arrange your life around certain practices that will enable you to do what you cannot do now by willpower alone. And said, how about this? Do any of you know how long an Olympian trains? Any idea? Just a guesstimate. How many hours a day do you suppose? 1, 2, 6, 8? 8? Supposedly about 7. Do the math. They're doing that about 310 days a year for 6 years before succeeding. I mean, you think about the endurance in that. Then that translates into probably 8,500 hours of training for an event that lasts about 60 seconds. I mean, that's incredible when you think about that. But what we're trying to suggest in the vision that we've been trying to cast over these last few months is that there is a need for training not only for athletes, but it's also for those of us that want to do life. And that it's really not about trying harder, but it's about training wisely. The Apostle Paul says this to Timothy. Do not waste time arguing over godless ideas and old wives' tales. Instead, train yourself to be godly. Now remember, as I set it up last week, Paul's at the end of his ministry time, and this life that he's trying to pour into his young protege, Timothy, that you got the elder speaking to the younger. He's trying to say, look, forget all this other stuff. What you really need to be doing is you really need to be in laying down this idea of training yourself. And so Paul even gives us advice to the church. In Corinth, he says, all athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So Paul's trying to change the game a little bit by saying, look, there's a deeper understanding of what we're trying to do and the why behind it. When it comes to running marathons or becoming a spiritual champion, the need is not to try harder, but to train wisely, as I've said. How about times, how many times have you heard a sermon or listened to a Bible study or read a book about following Jesus and said to yourself, I've got to try harder to be a better Christian? I think there's a lot of folks that do that. That's like me trying to say I'm really going to try hard to compete in the triathlon. I just can't do it. I don't have the stamina for it. I don't have the physique for it. It won't happen by an act of my will. I would only be able to compete in the triathlon by training for a triathlon. And so part of where we were in January and February was walking through this series I called Habits. And it really is grounding ourselves in this idea that if we're going to get to where God wants us, even as a church, it doesn't matter what programs, what opportunities we create, if we aren't in our own journey individually, if we aren't walking with God, and remember the acronym was Habits. So if we aren't hanging out with God, quiet time, prayer time in the morning, if we aren't being sort of accountable by living in life in relationship with each other, by being plugged into a faith community, if we aren't reading our Bible on a regular basis, if we aren't being intentional in all we do with our time and our talent, if we aren't tithing, not only of money, but even of our investing ourselves in the life of the church. And then if we aren't also sort of understanding the story that God's writing. So again, I go back to Joanna and the journey that she was on, and how even in the midst of motherhood, and I think that's a tension today, especially today, for many women. I know when I worked at the university and had many young ladies who came through our program and went on to become very successful, that in those moments where they were, they had become the attorney in the Secretary of State's office. I remember talking to one young woman, in particular, Lisa is her name, and she said, as she was pregnant with child, and I knew both she and her husband, the tension that she was feeling about, I don't know if I want to come back to work. And then even as she gave birth to her first child, and how, literally days into the conversation of being a mother, she's like, I think this whole professional thing, I'm having a hard time balancing it. And yet today, she's a very successful, she's leaned into it. In fact, I just saw pictures, they were at the Kentucky Derby, having a fun time with the kids, and how cool that is. But it's this idea that we have to be individually doing for ourselves before we can lean into what God wants to do. Now, before we go to the next point, I want to invite Jeanette Walls up. So I don't know if you want the stool of honor. Hot seat. Well, it's more something to hang on to than anything else. Yeah. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to give you the microphone.
Okay.
And I thought not just to lean in, because part of this is we're trying to lay out the rationale for why someone out there should be a part of the SHAPE class. But talk about, I know that you're a wife, but then you're a mother and a teacher. How is it the way you're wired, those things? As a mom, how did that prepare you to become a teacher and those two things? I'm not even sure enough of your story to know, did you have to take a hiatus like Joanna and sort of, have the kids and then lean back into it and do the double task? But just share a little bit about how God's wired you and how you process that.
Well, first of all, I think it's a true blessing that I've had, that I've been both a mother and a teacher. And I was a geeky kid. I loved to read. I loved school. School was just the best place to be. And so I think that's what wired me to be a teacher.
Okay.
And I did teach, and the kids were young, and there was that tension that you just mentioned. But the good thing about being a teacher is you have summers off.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that I'm doing now, I couldn't do when I had kids, because I felt like it was more, I needed to be home.
Okay.
So I wasn't in a lot of the organizations that I'm in now.
Sure.
I didn't take, some of the trips that I would have liked to have taken.
Sure.
But I don't regret it.
Right, but those are sacrifices you make, right?
Yeah, it really was. And I truly do believe that mothers are the most important teacher a child has.
Yeah.
And last week was Teacher Appreciation Week. I don't know if any of you knew that. And on Facebook, I copied this down.
Okay.
All right. Those who come to school prepared come to learn. Those who aren't come to be loved. And I really think that's the ultimate goal of teaching, and that you have to kind of meet everybody's individual needs. But being a mother made me a better teacher.
Yeah. And I value that, and I think, thinking about that quote, when I know just as I volunteer a little bit of time, a couple times a week to be in the schools, that there are some kids that come in, they're there, they got their books, they're going to do what they're supposed to do, but there are others, and I know from my own mom's perspective, or even Melinda's role at the Career Center, it's less so now at the university, but this idea that some are just looking for that affirmation, that they have something to offer,
Exactly.
that they have the ability to become like Joanna said, she had these dreams, and she just didn't know if she was going to have to set them aside. And I think it's just cool that, obviously because of her personal habits, I'm going to guess because of reading and taking quiet time, reading the Bible, and having conversation with God, that God sort of speaks to her in a very clear way and says, no, I'm going to take you to a whole other place. And so I think that's maybe a nice transition then into, why are we, you were part of the three folks that went, when they were on vacation, still I can't get my mind around this. Who goes on vacation and then goes to a seminar while you're in Florida of all places to learn more about how to help Christ followers grow in their spiritual walk. So unpack that a little bit. Your experience with that, and then maybe we can talk about why we want our folks to be part of that.
I really am coming back to your question, but I thought about this a lot this week, and I hope some of you remember when Deb Runland was here several years ago, and we met out in Fellowship Hall, and we had those...
She was the general presbyter.
She was our general presbyter. She's no longer there. But she asked us one morning, as she started out her discussion, she said, "How many of you are disciples of Christ?" And right away, Ron Walker raised his hand. And Edith Opart, who was with Deb, raised her hand. And the rest of us kind of looked around. You know, it was a very, very uncomfortable question. You know, yeah, I'm a Christian, but am I a disciple? And that question, I think, motivated our Christian Ed department, because our mission statement for Christian Ed is that all of our programming is aimed at making people better disciples of Christ. And so when I heard this SHAPE program, and this was in Sarasota, Florida, and I think Doug mentioned that to you last week, I really thought it was a good tool for discipleship. And so that was sort of the hook that got me in there.
Okay.
And I would like to encourage all of you to invest, and I think it is an investment in time, to make yourself a better disciple by coming to this program, because for me it helped. Just like you go to a doctor for a physical checkup, this is kind of like a spiritual checkup.
Right.
And it helps you to identify your strengths. It also helps you to prioritize, because just like, you know, there's all these charities that want your money, and you only have so much money to give, you know, even though you'd like to help out everybody. It's the same way with your spiritual gifts. There's lots of work to be done in this church, but you can't do it all.
Right.
You know, and you spread yourself too thin, and, you know, you just don't accomplish as much as you follow your heart, which that's the H in SHAPE, which is your passion, and channel what you're doing to what you're best suited for.
Okay. So we didn't talk about this, but just as you said it, I'm going to ask you to help me think it out loud. So I'm one of those folks who don't like to go to the doctor.
Right.
In fact, I don't go to the doctor until, like,
You're too late.
yeah, it's too late. And the meds don't, you know, and so
No.
why, you know, so help me.
I remember your finger.
Yeah, so it's like I ended up in the emergency room at 2 a.m., I guess, because I put it off. And finally the pain was great enough, but I don't know if that's a good enough analogy, because I don't know, but there are times in our Christian walk where life is complicated and messy. And so part of my excitement about the fact when I got the email from, I don't know, one of you that said, hey, we've been in this class, we're going to bring you back this stuff, and I already knew well about it because it's been a model that many churches have embraced to help you move from what I say the door, coming in the back door, to the core, to actually being part of a core team that's on mission, that's loving God and loving others. So what do you say to a person like me who isn't quite sure they should do it?
Well, I guess what I would say to you, and I'll say it to everybody here, is we are Christ's church,
Right.
and we are the hands and feet of God. And we talk a lot here at Linden Road about trying to have a footprint in the community, and it's only going to be done by people who can channel their talents and their abilities. And not to throw too much geekiness into it, but some of you are familiar with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he was a minister who was executed by the Nazis right before the war ended. And in his book, Call to Discipleship, he says that when you accept the call of Christ, you accept the call to discipleship. They go together. And the thing that I guess I would say to everybody and you is, this is a tool in your toolbox.
Thank you. Okay.
It's not going to be...
Well done. You get an A.
It's not going to be the end all, and,
Right.
and you're not going to come out with a certificate that, you know, but it's going to
Well, we
help.
will do a certificate.
Well, yes, but I should say, how about a degree then?
A degree, yeah.
Okay,
That's all
but
fine.
it's going to help you in your discipleship.
Right.
No matter where you're at in your journey, because we're all on a spiritual journey, but we're all in different
Right,
places.
so risk it, right?
Yeah, take a risk, and it should be fun too,
Well,
I
we've
hope.
promised to make it fun.
And we hope.
Yeah, no, we're gonna make it fun. Otherwise,
So,
all right, thank you. Would you say thank you to Jeanette for me? Thank you. So the thing I guess, just to wrap up on that, is this idea, it's about endurance. It's about running the race. That if I go back to the notion of running a marathon in the next Olympics, I mean, there's no way, on the one hand. But if you want to, you begin working out. And again, for those of you that have been around here long enough to know my story in terms of the bike ride, I mean, I started out 3 weeks before, and it's kind of weird because it's actually, I think, coming up here in the next couple of days, the anniversary of the tornadoes that went through Joplin. And it was actually the first week of June that Jackie Fath and I and some students went to Tuscaloosa and actually saw it, and it was actually that experience that sort of grounded me as like, okay, we went down, we tried to serve and love on these people, and it was like the destruction was so utterly vast. You know, literally city blocks were wiped out. Like from here to Millsboro, it was just gone. And people were trying to figure out how to rebuild their lives. And so God put a call in my life to say, okay, you want to be inconvenienced a little bit? I want you to ride your bike. And it's like, okay, well, how hard can that be? Well, I can tell you, it was like the hardest thing I've ever done. On the one hand, but the beauty that comes out of that is that we begin relationships with people. So even Thursday night, I had an opportunity, a young man that I mentored over the years. He was in a band. He's now working on his senior year in he wants to become a counselor, so he's working on a BA in psychology, and he wants to go on to seminary. But it was so cool, he said, hey, can I come ride my bike with you? And it's like, sure, why not? I mean, well, he shows up and he doesn't have any of the right stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, this is crazy. He's got this big trail bike with big tires, and I've got my sleek racing bike with the narrow tires, and I've got my, it's like, don't get the image, but I've got my spandex on, and we're going to go out and we're going to do this 20 miles. And, there was so much joy in riding with this young man because he pushed us. And everything was against him. He had all the wrong stuff, but what he had was heart. And he's like, I'm going to keep up with you. And it was so much fun that he came back to the house and wanted to fix an amazing breakfast meal for us at dinner. And just had this great conversation, just talking about life. And that's what I hope comes out of this class, is that we're encouraged about this thing called life, that we run it with endurance. I'm told there are two critical times in a marathon race, and I'll close with this. The first one is the beginning. As you leave the starting line, you feel so amazing, you believe that you can keep it up, and you can do this entire pace throughout the race. And then what happens to many is the temptation is to run too fast too soon, and then you expend your energies. You suddenly realize that you need to pace yourself. And so the second critical time in a marathon is at the halfway point. You suddenly realize that you still have as far to go as you've already run. And in fact, my young friends who were leaving the high school, it's like, okay, how many miles can you do? And he looks at me and says, well, I've done 8. And I'm thinking, okay, we're going to do 20. And I said, you need to tell me when you can't go much farther. And it's like, I'm going to tell you when we're halfway, because if we're halfway, that means you have to ride back. And I'm not pulling you back. And so the same kind of thing is that we need to do it with some intentionality. Runners call it hitting the wall when they get to this point, if they haven't paced themselves well. You come to the end of your stamina and you're not sure you can put one more foot in front of the other anymore. And races are not always won by the fastest, but they're rather won by the one that keeps on hanging on and refuses to give up. And that's the analogy why I think it's fun that Paul sort of encourages us to be in this game. Paul, in his letter to the church at Colossus, says this: we also pray that you will be strengthened with all his glorious power, so you will have all the endurance and the patience you need. So let me just end with this, with a question. Will you engage? Will you engage in the training, not just this particular class, so that you will have the endurance to run the race? It begins first with the Habits series. And then, more importantly, I'll ask the question this way, since I started with the idea of sitting on the couch. Will you get off the sofa and get in the race? Will you lean into what God has for you? And so, with that, those are the things I want you to ponder as His people. And whether it's the shape class or whether it's something else, will you lean into that in this journey to become all that God desires for you, so that we can together make a difference. But in doing that, and I want to just transition to a song, and you can remain seated. You will sort of recognize this song, but at the end of the day, we can only do this if we have God's help.